Alira had ruined a great many things in her 19 years. 3 good kettles, 1 apprenticeship, the left sleeve of the only dress she owned, which was also the dress she was wearing tonight. But she had never, not once, ruined an entire life with a single sentence. That record was about to end. She would remember the moment for the rest of her days. The vast, glittering hall of Corvith, gone silent around her, 400 nobles frozen mid-breath, and a man the size of a doorway staring down at her with eyes, the pale gray of frost on glass. She would remember the way the music had strangled itself into nothing, the way a countess near the pillars had pressed a gloved hand to her mouth, the way the herald's staff struck the marble floor a second, too late, one crisp, doom-shaped crack, and announced into the ringing quiet the name of the man she had just called, and she was quoting herself here, a rude, overgrown draft blocker with the manners of a wet dog. The name the herald announced was King Caovan Vale, Alpha of Orith, Lord of the Grey Keep, he who holds the northern line. The rude, overgrown draft blocker inclined his head. Alira's soul attempted to leave her body through the soles of her feet. But to understand how a lampright's apprentice came to insult the most dangerous man in the realm to his face, in front of the entire court, we have to go back 3 hours to when the only crisis in Alira's life was a chandelier. It was the night of the kindling ball, the one feast each winter when the great houses came to Corvith to watch the Alpha King light the first flame of the season. And every lamp, sconce, candle, and hanging lantern in the palace was expected to burn without fault or flicker until dawn. Which was, of course, why the master lamplight had chosen that exact afternoon to fall down a flight of servants' stairs and break her ankle in 2 places. "You'll go," Hesse had told her, hobbling and furious from the cot in the back of the lamp shop. Hesse was old and small and shaped like a walnut, and she had trained Alira since Alira was a foundling of 6 with soot already under her nails. "You know the fittings better than anyone but me. You'll tend the high fixtures, you'll keep to the walls, you'll speak to no one, and you will not," she jabbed a crooked finger, "say the first thing that comes into your head. Which is your one great and terrible gift." "I don't say the first thing that comes into my head," Alira had said, which was a lie so immediate it rather proved the point. So Alira had gone. She had climbed to the upper galleries in her patched gray dress, with her satchel of oils and wicks and trimming shears, and she had done exactly as told for nearly the whole of the evening. She kept to the walls. She spoke to no one. She watched the ball happen below her like weather she was not invited into. The silks, the shifter lords, with their 2 bright eyes, the laughter that cost more than she earned in a year. And then the great chandelier over the north gallery began to gutter. It was a monster of a thing, 40 flames on iron arms, and one of the oil channels had clogged so that half its lights were drowning and smoking. If it went out during the king's kindling, Hesse would never live down the shame, ankle or no ankle. So Alira slipped through a servant's arch into the narrow stone gallery that ran behind the wall, a dark, freezing, forgotten passage where the mechanism could be reached, and that was where she found the man. He was standing alone in the cold dark, doing nothing, just standing. A huge, still shape in a plain dark coat with no house colors, no jewels, no chain of office, the sort of clothes a mercenary might wear, or a guard off duty, or some sour minor cousin who'd wandered off to sulk away from the crowd. He had his back half to her, and his hand pressed flat against the frozen stone of the outer wall, and he was staring at nothing at all, and most unforgivably, he was standing directly between Alira and the chandelier's service panel. "Excuse me," she said. He didn't move. "Excuse me, I need the panel behind you." He turned his head slightly, said nothing. In the dark, she caught only the pale gleam of his eyes, and the sense of him being far, far larger than she'd first thought. And something rolled off him, a cold that had nothing to do with the drafty passage, a cold that made the little hairs on her arms stand up. But Alira was cold and tired and terrified of failing Hesse, and fear in Elira had always come out sideways as temper. "Look," she said. "I don't know whose retainer you are or whose sulking nephew, but there's a chandelier out there about to smoke out half the court during the king's own kindling. And you're leaning on the exact wall I need. Like a gargoyle, somebody left out in the frost, so could you possibly be a rude, overgrown draft blocker somewhere else, honestly?" The manners of a wet dog. For one heartbeat, the man went utterly still, stiller than before, if that was possible, the way the whole hall would go. Still 3 minutes later, then he stepped aside. He didn't argue. He simply moved out of her way with a slow, deliberate care, and as he passed her in the narrow dark she felt that cold pour off him again, and she heard him breathe in, sharp, startled, like a man who'd been struck, and she heard him say, very low, in a voice like a stone dragged over stone, and no time to wonder, because she was already shoving past him to the panel, clearing the oil channel with 2 practiced turns of her shears. Watching the 40 flames leap back up, bright and whole, she felt, absurdly, triumphant. She'd saved the kindling. Hasso would never know how close it had come. She turned to tell the rude man he was welcome, since she'd clearly just saved his evening too. But he was already gone, walking away down the gallery, out through the far arch back toward the light and the music, and the 400 waiting nobles, and then the herald's staff struck the marble, and the whole court turned toward the archway where the king of Orith was meant to appear to light the first flame of winter. And out of the dark gallery, out of the exact passage Elira had just chased him from, still tugging his plain dark cuff straight, stepped the rude, overgrown draft blocker with the manners of a wet dog. The hall dropped into a bow, like a field of grass under wind. Elira, standing frozen in the servants' arch, with her shears still in her hand, did not bow, because Elira had entirely forgotten how her knees worked. The king's pale gray gaze swept the silent hall, and found her unerring instant, as if he'd known exactly where she'd be. And he did not look angry, which somehow was worse. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has been searching for a very long time, and had begun to believe he would never find. Then Kievan Vial, Alpha of Orith, said the words that would change her small, invisible life forever. "That one," he said, and the whole court followed his gaze to the girl in the patched gray dress. "Bring her to me." Elira did not remember being brought anywhere. She remembered the crowd's 400 faces turning as one. She remembered a hand, gentle but iron-strong, closing around her elbow, and a low male voice near her ear saying, "Walk, just walk. Don't run, whatever you do, and for the love of the moon, don't say anything else." The voice belonged to a lean man with a scarred jaw and tired, clever eyes, dressed in the deep charcoal of the king's own household. He steered her out of the great hall through a side door, before the crowd could finish gasping, down a corridor, and into a small, windowless waiting room that smelled of cold candle smoke and beeswax. Then he shut the door, leaned against it and looked at her the way a healer looks at a patient who has swallowed something they very much should not have. "Do you know," he said, "what you just did?" "I fixed the chandelier," Elira said. Her voice came out very small and very high. The man closed his eyes briefly, as if praying. "You fixed the chandelier. The North Gallery one was smoking. I cleared the oil channel. It's fine now." She was aware she was babbling and entirely unable to stop. "I was told to keep to the walls and speak to no one, and I did, mostly. It's just that there was a rude man in the way and I didn't know he was—" Her throat closed. "Oh no. I didn't know he was I called him I told the king he had the manners of a wet dog." "You did," the man agreed. "In front of the assembled great houses of Orith? It was, I'll admit, memorable. Are you going to have me killed?" "I'm Doran," the man said, as though that answered the question. "I'm the king's beta, his second. His right hand, when his right hand isn't busy putting out fires that his own mouth, or tonight, your mouth, started." He studied her. "What's your name?" "Elira. Just Elira." I'm the lampright's apprentice. Well, the apprentice's Hessa fell. She broke her ankle. They sent me instead. I'm nobody. I swear I'm nobody. Please, my lord, I never meant nobody, Doran repeated softly. And something crossed his tired face that she couldn't read at all. Something that looked impossibly like pity. You keep saying that, because it's true. He pushed off the door and crossed to her, and he did the strangest thing then. He leaned in close, not threatening, but careful, deliberate, and he breathed in slow, the way the rude man in the gallery had breathed in. Whatever he found in the air around her made his eyebrows climb toward his hairline, and the tiredness fall clean off his face, replaced by something sharp and stunned and almost frightened. Well, Doran said, mostly to himself, that's not possible. What isn't? He didn't answer that either. Instead, he pulled a chair from the wall, turned it around, and sat astride it facing her, arms folded across its back, studying her with those clever, tired eyes, as if she were a lock he meant to pick. Tell me about yourself, Elira, just Elira, he said, quickly. Where are your people? I don't have people. She said it the way she always said it, flat, fast, before anyone could make it a wound. I was left on the steps of the Ashlane orphanage when I was a baby. No name pinned to me, no token, nothing. Hessa took me on as an apprentice when I was 6, because I was small enough to reach inside the lamp cages, and too much trouble for anyone else to want. She lifted her chin. So, there's nothing to tell. I'm not a lost heiress, my lord. If that's what everyone's hoping, there's no secret bloodline. I'm exactly what I look like. I'm nobody, and I've been nobody, very reliably my whole life, and I would honestly love to go back to it. Something moved behind Doran's eyes, not pity this time, but a kind of grim, tired recognition, as though she'd confirmed the very thing he'd been dreading. He was quiet for a long moment. Do you know, he said at last, how many healers I have brought before the king this past year? How many hedge witches, how many bone setters, how many quiet, clever women, with a reputation for curing what can't be cured? 23. I counted. I brought each of them in secret, and each of them looked at him, and each of them went pale and quiet, and told me the same thing, that there was nothing to be done, that whatever ailed him was beyond their craft, and could they please be allowed to leave the Grey Keep and never speak of it again. And not one of them made him better for so much as an hour. Not one of them changed a single thing. Why are you telling me this? Elira whispered. Because, Doran said. You fixed him for the length of a breath in a cold hallway without even meaning to, without even knowing who he was, and I watched it happen. He leaned in. I have served that man since we were boys. I have watched him hold a ward together with his bare hands, and I have watched him fall apart one silent piece at a time, this last year, with no one able to stop it. And, last night, for the space of one insult from a lampright's apprentice, I saw something come back into his face that I had given up on ever seeing again. His jaw tightened. So no, Elira, I don't think you're a nobody. I think you may be the single most important person in the kingdom, and I think you have no idea. And I think that is going to break my heart before this is over. Elira stared at him, her pulse loud in her ears. What's wrong with him? She asked. You keep circling it. Just tell me. That's not mine to tell, Doran said, and rose, and put the chair back against the wall. That's his. And he'll tell you himself, if he's the man I think he still is, even though telling you is the last thing on this earth he wants to do. He crossed to the door and spoke without turning around, and his voice had changed. Gone formal, gone careful, the voice of a man choosing every word like a stone laid over thin ice. Elira, listen to me. You are going to stay in this room. You are not going to leave the palace grounds tonight, or tomorrow, or until I tell you it's safe. I'll send word to your Hessa that you're kept late on the king's business, which is true. You are not, under any circumstances to speak of what the king said in that hall, not to Hessa, not to a friend, not to a priest. Do you understand? He said. Bring her to me, Alira whispered. The full weight of it was only now arriving, cold and slow, like the chill that had rolled off the man in the gallery. Why would the king want me brought to him? I insulted him. I humiliated him in front of everyone. Men have been flogged for less. Men have lost their tongues for less. Yes, Doran said quietly. They have. Then why isn't he angry? And there it was, the thing that had been circling her since the king's gray eyes found her across 400 bowing heads. He hadn't been angry. She was almost certain of it. He'd looked at her like she was water, and he'd been 10 days in a desert. Doran turned at last, his hand on the latch, and for a moment the clever, tired eyes were unbearably kind. That, he said, is exactly what frightens me. He opened the door. A guard shape filled the corridor beyond. Get some rest if you can, Doran said. You'll want it, because at first light, the king has asked to see you alone. He paused. He asked for you before I could even get you out of the hall. He asked for you. And here Doran's voice dropped so low, she barely caught it, as though he'd been waiting to ask for a very long time. The door shut. The bolt slid home. And Alira, alone in a cold little room in the heart of the Grey Keep, sat down on the hard bench, wrapped her arms around her knees, and understood with perfect, dreadful clarity that whatever was happening to her, it had not started tonight. It had been waiting for her, and tomorrow, at first light, it was going to have her name. She did not sleep. The king's study was nothing like she'd imagined. A king's anything would be. A throne, perhaps, though she dimly understood one didn't keep a throne in one's study. Instead, the room Doran led her to at first light was severe and spare and very, very cold. Colder than the winter morning outside had any right to make it. Stone walls, a wall of shelved books and rolled maps, a great desk of blackwood, and behind it a hearth stacked high with logs and roaring with flame that seemed strangely to throw no heat at all. Alira felt the cold of the room settle into her teeth. And by the window, silhouetted against the pale dawn, stood Kievan Vale. In daylight, he was worse, or better. She couldn't decide. He was tall and broad and carved-looking, a man built to end arguments simply by standing up. And his dark hair had a strange dusting of pale gray silver at the temples that she was fairly sure had not been there in the portraits that hung in the city squares, portraits of a young war king, all fury and gold. This man looked older than his portraits, tired in a way that went past his skin. And when he turned from the window and those frost-pale eyes landed on her, she saw the shadows carved beneath them, the hollow at his cheek, and the way he held himself very still and very careful, as though he were a cup filled exactly to the brim, and one wrong movement would spill him. Alira dropped into the lowest, most desperate curtsy of her life. "Your Majesty," she said to the floor, "I am so sorry, I didn't know it was you." "I would never, I did say it. I can't pretend I didn't. 400 people heard me say it. But I never would have if I'd known. And I'll accept whatever punishment you. Please, don't take my tongue. I need it for talking, which I realize is the entire problem." "Stop." His voice was low and rough. That same stone-on-stone sound. "Please." She stopped. She stayed folded down toward the floor. "Stand up," he said. "Look at me." "I can't." Something in his voice caught and steadied. "I would prefer to see your face." She rose. She looked at him, and the strangest thing happened. Standing there in the freezing room, 3 careful steps of black stone floor between them, Alira watched something ease in the great, tired figure of the Alpha King. Watched the rigid set of his shoulders loosen by a fraction. Watched him take a slow breath, and another, as though the very air of the room had become easier to pull into his chest simply because she was standing in it. "You're not going to punish me," she said. It came out as a question and an accusation at once. No. Why not? I insulted you. In front of the whole court. You're the king. Everyone says you ended the Northern War by yourself, that you're the most dangerous man alive. That you, once, she caught herself, that I once killed a rival alpha with my hands and did not shift to do it. Kaivan finished, flat and quiet. Yes, they say that. It's even true. His pale eyes held hers, and a starving little lamplight called me a wet dog in a cold hallway, and it is the first time in longer than I can remember that anything at all felt. He stopped. His jaw worked. It doesn't matter. Sit. There's a chair by the fire. Please, you're shivering. She wasn't sure the fire would help. The whole room was wrong. Cold to the bone despite the roaring hearth. But she sat. And he came and sat across from her, not behind the great desk, just a man in a plain dark coat, lowering his huge frame into a chair, and up close the cold that poured off him was undeniable. It was him. The room wasn't cold. He was cold. Cold as the frozen wall he'd been leaning on in the gallery, cold as deep well water, and the chill rolled off his skin in waves. Without thinking, the way she never could stop herself from doing the thing she shouldn't, Elira reached out and laid 2 fingers against the back of his hand. He flinched as though she'd branded him, but he didn't pull away. His skin was like ice, like touching stone left out in the deep of winter. She gasped, and would have snatched her hand back, except that in the instant her fingers touched him, something happened. A thread of warmth, her warmth, seemed to run out of her fingertips and into him, and she watched his eyes fall shut, watched a long shudder go through the whole vast frame of him, watched, impossibly, a faint flush of living color come up under the gray pallor of his face. He turned his hand over, slow, so that her fingers rested in his palm, and he closed his fingers around them, gentle as a man cupping a flame against wind, and he made a sound she would never forget, low and broken and profoundly, helplessly relieved. There it is, he breathed, eyes still shut. I thought I'd dreamed it in the gallery. I thought. He opened his eyes. They were wet. Do you feel that? She did. That was the terrifying part. Where their skin touched, the cold retreated. And under the cold, there was something else, something that had woken in her own chest the moment he closed his hand around hers. A deep, aching, impossible pull, as if some part of her that had been asleep her whole life had just lifted its head. I don't understand, she whispered. What's wrong with you? Why are you so cold? Why does touching me? Because you're mine, Kayavan said. The words dropped into the freezing quiet like a struck bell. I don't, Your Majesty. I'm a lamplight. I'm a foundling. Nobody even knows my mother's name. I'm not. You can't possibly. My wolf knew you, he said, low and certain and terrible. Across a hall of 400 people, through a stone wall, in the dark. I felt you the moment you walked into this palace tonight, before I ever saw your face. I have felt you coming for months, Elira. A warmth, at the edge of a life that has had no warmth in it for a year, and I told myself it was madness. And then a girl in a gray dress called me a wet dog, and my wolf, which has been silent and dying for longer than I can say, stood up. His hand tightened around hers. I chose you before the ball. I chose you before I knew your name or your face. I have already chosen you. I simply had no idea the moon would be cruel enough to make it you. Someone I am now going to have to drag into the middle of the thing that is killing me. Alira's heart slammed against her ribs. The thing that's killing you, she repeated. Kea von Fael looked at her, king of Oriath, cold as a grave, and holding onto her fingers like they were the last warm thing in the world. Has your Hessa, he said quietly, ever told you what the silvering is? Elira had come straight from the palace to the lamp shop the moment Doran allowed it, half running through the frost-bright streets of Arith, with her head full of the king's cold hand and the word he'd left hanging in the air like smoke. She'd burst in, expecting to blurt the whole impossible story. Instead, She'd got exactly 4 words out. "The king has thee," before Hesse had held up a hand, hobbled to the front door on her splinted ankle, looked up and down the lane, shut the door, barred it, and lowered herself onto a stool, with the grim care of a woman preparing to dig up something she'd buried a long time ago. Hesse said, "Say the word he used, the silvering." The old woman shut her eyes. "Hesse, Hesse, you know it. I can see that you know it. You told me you were a lamp maker your whole life." "I was a great many things before I was a lamp maker, child," Hesse said. And for the first time in 13 years, Elira heard something under the walnut crust. Of her something educated, something courtly, something old. "I was a lore mistress at the Grey Keep once, when the king was a boy. Before I learned that knowing dangerous things is a fast road to a short life, and traded it all for wicks and oil and a quiet shop where nobody asks a nobody any questions." Her eyes opened. "The silvering is a death curse, the rarest and cruelest kind. And if the King of Arth carries it, then he is a dead man walking, and you foolish, warm-hearted girl, have just been dragged onto the pyre beside him." The room seemed to tilt. "Tell me," Elira whispered. "All of it." So Hesse told her. In a low voice, with the door barred, she told her that a year ago the king had gone north to end a war. That much the whole realm knew. What the realm did not know was how it ended. That there had been a betrayal at the heart of it, someone Caven had trusted with his life, who had opened a door that should have stayed shut. That people had died in that betrayal who should never have died. Hesse would not say who, only that the king had failed to protect someone he loved, and that he had never forgiven himself for it, not for 1 hour since. And that in the last black moment of the war, a dying enemy, a bone witch, the mother of the man the king had struck down, had laid a curse on him with her final breath. "A death curse feeds," Hesse said. "That's the horror of them. They don't simply kill, they find the wound already in a man's soul, the guilt, the grief, the thing he cannot forgive himself, and they pour poison into it, night after night, and they use his own heart to kill him. The silvering turns a man to cold. His warmth goes first. Then his wolf falls silent. Then, slowly, over a year, perhaps 2, the cold reaches his heart, and the heart turns to silverstone, and stops." She looked at Elira. How gray was he, at the temples, in the face. "And cold. Hesse, he's cold as stone. The whole room around him goes cold. And the fire didn't warm it. Nothing warmed it. Then he's far along," Hesse said. "Further than a year. He should be dead already." She frowned, and something shifted in her face. The old lore mistress waking up, turning a puzzle over. "That's wrong. That's the part that's wrong. A man that deep in the silvering doesn't walk into a kindling ball on his own 2 feet. Something has been slowing it. Something has been holding the cold back from his heart, buying him time he has no right to." Her sharp old eyes came up and fixed on Elira's face. "What did he say happened?" "When he touched you," Elira's mouth went dry. "The cold went away," she whispered. "Where I touched him, the warmth went out of me and into him, and his face got its color back. And he said," her voice cracked, "he said," his wolf stood up, "that it's been silent and dying for a year, and it stood up when I called him a wet dog." The silence in the little shop was absolute. "Say that again," Hesse breathed. "He said I'm his, that his wolf knew me across the whole hall, that he'd been feeling me coming for months, a warmth at the edge of his life, that he chose me before he ever saw my face." Elira's eyes were burning now. "Hesse, I'm a foundling. I'm nobody. Nobody chooses me. My own parents left me on a step. People like me we don't get chosen, we get used. We make ourselves useful and small, and we stay out of the way. That's the whole of it. That's the whole of what we're for. So it can't be true. It can't be me. He has to be wrong." And Hesse, old, hard, unsentimental Hesse, who had never once in 13 years told Alira she was anything more than a passable apprentice with a dangerous mouth, reached out and took both of Alira's soot-stained hands in her gnarled ones and held them and said very gently, "He isn't wrong. That's what I'm trying to tell you. A death curse can only be held back by one thing in all the world, and it isn't medicine, and it isn't magic, and it isn't a warm fire. It's a true bonded mate. A soul the cursed heart recognizes as its own. That's what's been slowing his silvering. That's what stood his dying wolf back up in a cold hallway." Her grip tightened. "He hasn't been getting closer to you by accident, Elira. His curse has been starving, and it has spent a year turning his whole being toward the only warmth that can hold it off, toward you. It has been calling you across the entire kingdom." "But I only met him last night," Elira whispered. "Did you?" Hessa said. "Or did you simply finally get close enough to feel the pull that's been aimed at your heart for a year? Tell me true, child. This last year. Have you been well?" And Alira went cold all over because she thought of it now. The year of restless nights, the ache in her chest she blamed on grief for a mother she'd never known, the strange homesick pull toward the gray keep whenever she'd passed it, the feeling, mad, shameful, done, unspoken, that she was walking around her whole life waiting for something she couldn't name. "No," she said. "No. And I haven't been well at all." Hessa let go of her hands and sat back, and her face was grave as a headstone. "Then hear the rest of it," the old woman said, "because you deserve to choose with your eyes open. And the king is too honorable and too far gone to make you understand what he's asking. A true bond is not a leash you can drop. Elira, once it wakes, it binds both ways. You can hold his cold back. You may be the only living soul who can. But if you let this bond wake and grow, and then his curse takes him, anyway, if that silver reaches his heart while you're bound to it." She stopped. "Say it," Alira said. "It won't only be the king of Orith who dies," Hessa said quietly. "It will be you, too." Somewhere out in the frozen lane, a palace bell began to toll. And, on the workbench between them, the little tending lamp Elira had lit not an hour before, steady, trimmed, perfect, guttered all at once, as though something cold had breathed on it, and went out. Neither of them had opened a window. They did not order her to stay. That was the first thing that told Alira this king was not what the songs said. She'd come back to the Grey Keep expecting chains, or at least command, expecting the most dangerous man alive to simply take what he needed, the way powerful men always took what they needed from girls, with no people to notice them gone. Instead, she was brought again to the cold study, and Kayvon Fail stood by his heatless fire, and he told her the truth. All of it. The war. The betrayal he would not yet name. The curse. The way it fed on the wound in him. The silver creeping toward his heart. And then, in a low, rough voice, the last and worst of it, that the only thing in all the world that could hold the cold back was a true bonded mate, that his cursed heart had spent a year turning itself toward her across the whole kingdom, and that if she let that bond wake and it failed to save him, it would take her down into the dark alongside him. "So I will not ask it of you," he said, and turned his frost-pale eyes on her, and she saw what it cost him to say it. "I have taken enough from enough people. I will not take your life on the chance it buys me a few more months of mine. Dorian will give you gold, a house if you want one, far from here, a name, papers, a fresh start in any city in Orith. You may walk out of this, keep tonight and never think of me again, and I will make certain no one ever troubles you for what you said at the ball, or what you are to me." His jaw tightened. "That is the honorable thing. That is the only honorable thing. So take it, Elira. Please. Take it and go." And Elira, foundling, nobody, the girl who had spent her whole life making herself small and useful and out of the way, looked at the dying king, offering her freedom, and felt something she had never once felt before rise up hot in her chest. She was furious. "How dare you?" she said. Caven blinked. How dare you? You drag me in here. You tell me I'm yours. You tell me your wolf has been calling to me across the whole kingdom for a year. You tell me that all that restlessness, all those nights I couldn't breathe, all that homesick aching for a place I'd never been, that was you. That was this. That was real. And then in the same breath, you tell me to take some gold and walk away and never think of you again? Her voice cracked. Do you have any idea what it is for someone like me to be chosen? Do you know how many times in my life someone has looked at me and decided I was worth keeping? None. Not once. My own mother laid me on a step in the cold and walked away. And you're standing there trying to do the exact same thing. Only you have the gall to call it honor. The king stared at her as if she'd struck him. You could die, he said hoarsely. Then I could die. Illyra snapped. But I will not be handed a bag of gold and shown the door by one more person who's decided it's kinder to be rid of me. You want to protect me. Fine. Protect me here. I'm staying. She folded her arms to hide that her hands were shaking. Besides, 23 healers couldn't hold your cold back for an hour. I did it by accident with 2 fingers. I'd like to see what I could do if I actually tried. For a long moment, Cavenvale said nothing at all. Then he crossed the cold room in 3 strides and Illyra braced for anything except what he did, which was to stop just short of touching her, and bow his head, and breathe out, long and unsteady, like a man setting down a weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten what standing straight felt like. The most impossible person I have ever met. I've been told, Illyra said. Now sit down before you freeze us both. You look half frozen, and it's frankly unflattering. So the arrangement began. To the court she was named the king's new keeper of lights, a small invisible position, a foundling given a small charity post, nothing worth a second glance. In truth, she was given a warm little chamber that adjoined the king's own, and each night, when the keep had gone quiet, she came to him. It was not what the whispering court imagined. He sat in his great chair, she sat beside him. She took his cold hand in both of hers, and she held it, and she talked. Because talking was the one thing Illyra had never in her life run short of, and slowly, night by night, the color came back into his gray face. Who had not truly rested in a year, learned again how to close his eyes. The first night he stayed under for 2 hours, she sat perfectly still the whole time so as not to wake him. And when Doran came at dawn and saw his king sleeping, the hard, tired Beta had to turn and face the wall for a moment and pretend something had gotten his eye. The second week, Illyra noticed the chamber they'd given her had been quietly fitted with heated hearthstones, and a fur, she was fairly sure, had come off the king's own bed. I didn't ask for these, she told him that night. No, Caven agreed, not looking up from the map he was pretending to read. The tips of his ears had gone faintly pink, the only warm color she'd yet seen reach his face on its own. You didn't. Illyra bit back a smile and said nothing, and something in her chest went soft and dangerous and warm. But it was on the 9th night that it happened. She was holding his hand as he slept, half drowsing herself, when the warmth that always flowed out of her into him seemed to catch, to turn, to run backward. And deep in Illyra's own chest, in a place she had never known was there, something enormous and long asleep lifted its head, opened eyes that had been shut her entire life, and looked at Kaya von Vale. She felt it as clearly as a second heartbeat, a presence, a hunger, a voice with no words that said unmistakably, "Mine." She gasped and yanked her hand back. Kaivan woke instantly, alpha quick, on his feet before she could speak, and then he went very still, staring at her, his nostrils flaring, his frost-pale eyes gone wide and luminous in the dark. "Your scent just changed," he breathed. "Illyra." "What did you?" He stopped. Something like wonder and horror warred across his face. "Doran," he called sharp, and the beta was through the door in seconds. Tofge Van didn't take his eyes off her. "Tell me I'm wrong," he said. "Tell me I'm imagining it." "Sent her?" Dorian crossed the room and breathed in and went absolutely white. "That's not possible," he whispered, the same words he'd said the first night in the little waiting room. "She's got no bloodline. She's a foundling, off a step. She can't be." "Can't be what?" Elira demanded, her own strange new heartbeat pounding in her ears. "What is happening to me? What am I?" Kyavan crouched slowly in front of her chair, so that his cold, colorless eyes were level with hers, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle and stunned, and it changed the shape of her whole life. "You're a wolf, Elira," he said. "Like me. You've been one all along." He swallowed. "Your wolf never woke because it was never claimed, never called, never chosen, never given a single reason to open its eyes." His hand hovered near her cheek, not quite touching. "Until now, she did not sleep that night or the next, and for once it had nothing to do with the king. A wolf. Her whole life she had been a foundling, a nobody, the smallest and plainest thing in every room. And all along there had been this curled up inside her, this second self, this creature that had woken hungry and certain the instant it laid eyes on Coven File. Hessa, when Elira half ran to her with the news, had only nodded slowly, grimly, as if a long-held suspicion had come home to roost. "Some wolves never wake," the old woman said. "The abandoned ones. The ones with no pack, no bond, no one to call them into themselves. The wolf sleeps, to spare the child the grief of a bond it will never have." Her eyes were sad. "Yours slept 19 years, child." And then a dying king's curse reached across a whole kingdom and called it, of course, it woke. It's been waiting your whole life to be wanted that badly. That was the thing Elira could not put down. And so the nights changed. Now when she took Kayvon's cold hand, the warmth ran both ways, and the bond between them the thing Hessa had warned her of. The thing that bound both ways, once woken, grew a little brighter, a little stronger, night after night, whether either of them meant it to or not. She could feel him now at the edges of herself, his moods, the bone-deep exhaustion of him, the grief he never spoke of, humming always underneath like a low-struck string. And he could feel her. She knew it by the way his head would turn when her spirits lifted, the way the ghost of a smile would touch his hard mouth before she'd said a word. They talked. Oh, how they talked. Or, rather, she talked, and he listened, which she was slowly realizing was its own kind of loud. She told him about the orphanage, and Hessa, and the guardsman she'd once given a salve that turned his teeth green for a week. And one night, past the middle hour, she got him laughing, really laughing, a rough, startled sound that seemed to surprise him more than her, and she watched a full, living flush of color climb his whole face and stay there, and she thought, dizzily, "I did that. I made the most dangerous man alive laugh in the dark." There were harder nights, too, the ones where the cold came on strong and fast, and she had to hold both his hands and press her forehead to his and simply wait it out, breathing with him, until the gray pulled back. On one of those nights, shaking, half lost, he'd said a thing she was fairly sure he hadn't meant to say aloud. "I used to be able to protect the people I loved," he'd whispered into the dark, his voice gone, young and stripped down and nothing like a king's. "That was the one thing I was for. And then there came a night I couldn't, and I've been cold ever since. Long before the witch ever cursed me." His frozen fingers had tightened around hers. "You should know that about me, Elira. The cold isn't only the curse. Some of it is just true." She hadn't known what to say, so she'd done the only thing that had ever helped anyone. She'd held on, and stayed, and let him not be alone with it. And in the morning, he'd looked at her like a man who'd confessed some terrible secret and been forgiven, and neither of them had spoken of it, and something between them had gone quietly and permanently deeper. "You have a good laugh," she told him on a lighter night. "You should do it before people. It'd terrify them. They'd think you'd finally lost your mind." "They already think I've lost my mind," Kyavan said. I made a foundling lamprite, my keeper of lights, and I look at her like. He stopped. Like what? Alira asked. Her heart had begun to pound. He turned his head. In the low light, his pale eyes had gone soft and dark and unbearably tired of pretending. Like she's the first warm thing in a very cold year, he said. Like I'd burn the whole kingdom down before I'd let her go back out into the cold. The air went thin. She was leaning toward him before she knew she'd moved, and he toward her, close enough that she could feel the faint warmth she'd put back into him breathing off his skin, close enough that his gaze dropped to her mouth, and then his eyes rolled back, and the cold slammed into the room like a door blown open in winter. And Kayvan Vale's whole body went rigid and toppled sideways in his chair. Kayvan! Alira grabbed for him, caught his icy hand in both of hers, and the study was gone. She was standing in a vast frozen hall. It stretched away into a white, shadowless forever, a great throne room locked in ice, its high windows blind with frost, its long tables set for a feast that had frozen mid-pour, wine hanging in the air, in cracked red icicles. And everywhere, everywhere the people, frozen where they stood. Soldiers with rimed armor and open, silent mouths, villagers, gaunt and gray. Wolves in the shape of men and women, their eyes filmed white, all of them turned inward, all of them facing the dais at the hall's cold heart. The silence was total. The cold was not the study's cold. It was worse. It was final. It was the cold at the bottom of a grave. Caven knelt on the frozen dais, his head bowed, unmoving. One more statue among the dead. But not frozen. She could see his breath ghosting in the terrible air, could see the fine tremor running through his bowed shoulders. He was alive in here, alive and kneeling, and made to look, night after night, at every single face. Because that was the horror of the place, she understood, as her eyes adjusted. The frozen dead were not strangers. Each face was carved with a wound, a hunger, a grief, and every one of them was turned toward the king, and though their white eyes were filmed and blind, she had the sick certainty that they saw him, that they had been placed here to be seen by him. This was not a graveyard. It was an accusation with 1,000 frozen mouths, and it had been built for an audience of one. Kyavan, her voice fell dead in the frozen air. She ran to him, her bare feet silent on the ice, and dropped down and seized his shoulders. And he was so cold, so gray, so gone. And past him, at the very center of the dais, one figure was not frozen like the others. Small, dark-haired, sitting on the steps of the throne with her hands folded neat in her lap, watching the kneeling king with an expression of terrible, patient sorrow. She was younger than Alira. There was a stillness to her, the pallor of someone long past saving. And when Alira's eyes fell on her, the young woman turned that sad, patient gaze from the king to Alira, and smiled the gentlest smile Alira had ever seen, and it chilled her to the core. "He can't hear you," the young woman said softly. "He never can. He only hears me now. Who are you?" Alira whispered. But Kyavan had begun to shudder under her hands, and the frozen dead were beginning, ever so slowly, to turn their filmed white eyes toward Alira. And terror took her, and she did the only thing she knew how to do. She wrapped both arms around the cold kneeling king, and she poured every scrap of warmth in her into him, and she pulled. She woke on the floor of the study, with Caven's dead weight across her lap, gasping, both of them soaked in cold sweat. He came awake with a ragged cry, alpha-fast hands closing on her arms, and then he saw her face, saw whatever was written there, and every drop of color drained back out of him. "You saw it," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice had gone to ash. "The hall, the frozen hall, you were there." There was a girl, Alira breathed, on the throne steps, a girl with a sorrow that would never lift. "She said you only hear her now," She grabbed his icy face in both hands. Kayavin! Who is she? And Kayavin Vael, Alpha of Orith, he who holds the northern line, looked at her with such raw and total horror that she understood, before he said a word, that she had just seen the one thing in all the world he would have died to keep her from seeing. He tore himself away from her and got up and put the whole width of the cold room between them. And when he turned back, his face had closed like a gate slammed shut. "You can't go back there," he said. "Ever. Do you understand me?" "Never again. Caven, listen to me." His voice cracked like ice underfoot. "That place is not a dream. It's where the curse takes me, every night, for a year. It's the hall where He stopped, dragged in a breath. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you followed me in. You, Alira. Do you know what that means? It means the bond is deep enough now to drag you into it too. It means that when the cold finally takes me down there for good, when the silver reaches my heart and I don't come back up, you'll be bound so tightly to me that it'll pull you down into that frozen hall with me, and you will freeze there, awake forever, on the steps of that throne, and it will have been my doing." He was shaking now. "And not from the cold. One person I loved is already lost inside that hall, because of me. I will not lead you in, after her. One person," Illyra said slowly. "The girl. Who is she?" "Cavan. Don't. The girl on the throne steps. The one you only hear now. Tell me who she is." Myril. The name tore out of him, raw and broken, and it seemed to cost him something vital, because he sagged against the wall as if it had been cut out of him. Her name was Myril. And that is all you will ever have of it, because I am not going to stand here and watch you walk one single step further into the thing that killed her. This ends. Now. You don't mean that. She was on her feet, crossing to him. "You feel this same as I do. I can feel you feeling it. That's how the bond works. You can't hide it from me anymore. You told me 2 hours ago you'd burn the kingdom before you let me back out into the cold. And now I know what I told you." He wouldn't look at her. "I've spent the whole hour hating myself for it." "Then, stop. Stop deciding my life for me, like everyone else always has." She was close enough now to feel the killing cold pouring off him, and she made herself stand in it. "You keep saying the silver's a hand's breadth from your heart. Fine. So it's close, but it hasn't taken you yet, has it? A man that far gone should have died months ago. Hassa said so and you didn't. And do you know why? Because of me. Because for 14 nights, something warm has been holding it back. You're not proof the bond can't save you, Caven. You're proof it already is." Her voice dropped. "You just can't bear to hope, because hoping means you might fail 2 people instead of 1. That landed. She felt it land straight through the bond, a flinch, a spasm of something raw, and for a moment, his whole terrible resolve trembled on its edge. "I lied." He said it savagely, and the cold surged off him so hard that frost bloomed white across the stone at his feet. "It was a weak, selfish thing to say and I should never have said it. Listen to what I am telling you, Alira. It was never a question of whether you could save me. I am already lost. 23 healers saw it. Hessa saw it. The silver is a hand's breadth from my heart, and there is no bond, and no warmth, and no impossible warm-hearted girl who can turn it back now. All you have done, all you can do, is bind yourself so tightly to a dead man that you follow him into the grave." His pale eyes were wet and terrible. "I will not let my last act in this world be dragging the first person who ever chose to stay down into that cold with me. I won't." "So that's it," Alira said. Her own voice had gone very quiet and very steady, the way it did in the half-second before she said the thing she absolutely should not. "You've decided, on your own, without me, that it's kinder to be rid of me." Something flickered across his ruined face. He heard the echo of it, her own words from the first night. "One more person who's decided, it's kinder to be rid of me." And for one heartbeat she saw him waver. Then Cave in Viale did the cruelest thing he knew how to do. because it was the only way he knew to save her. "Guard!" he called. The door opened. Doran stepped in, and one look at the king's face and Elira's told him everything, and Elira watched the beta close his tired eyes in something like grief. "Escort the Keeper of Lights back to her master's shop," Kaivan said, in the flat, dead voice of a man passing sentence. "Pay Hessa a year's wage for the loss of her apprentice's time. The position is dissolved. Miss Elira is not to be admitted to the Grey Keep again." He turned his back on her, to the frost-blind window. "For any reason." "Coven," Elira said. Her voice broke on it. "Go," he said to the glass. And when she didn't move, when she stood frozen and gutted in the middle of the cold room, he said it again, and this time it came out of him as a roar, an Alpha's full voice. The voice that had ended a war, G.O., and it hit her like a physical blow and drove her back a step, and the tears finally spilled over hot down her cold face. She went. She grabbed her thin cloak with shaking hands, and she fled the cold study and the cold keep. Doran caught up with her in the corridor, and for once the clever tired beta had no clever tired words. He walked beside her in silence to the gate, and only there, as the guards drew back the bolts, did he speak, low and fast, so no one else could hear. "He's wrong," Doran said, "about being past saving. I've watched him for a year, and I've never once seen the cold retreat. Not for a healer, not for a potion, not for anything, until you. Whatever he told you in there, he told you, because he's terrified. And a terrified alpha will burn down the one thing he wants most sooner than watch it get hurt." He pressed something into her hand, a small iron key, worn smooth. "Servant's gate. East wall. It sticks in the cold, so pull hard." His jaw worked. "I never gave you that. But if you're half as stubborn as you were at the ball, girl, don't you dare let him die alone to spare you a bruise." Then he stepped back, and the gate swung open, and Elira walked out into the frozen dark of the city she'd been so briefly and so impossibly wanted in the iron key, burning cold in her fist. And she had made it exactly as far as the great outer gate, no further. When the bond, the half-woken thing that now ran through the very center of her, gave a wrench so violent she doubled over against the icy stone of the gatehouse and could not breathe. It felt like a hand had reached into her chest and begun, very slowly, to pull her heart out by the roots. And far behind her, high in the dark bulk of the Grey Keep, a single window that had shown warm lamplight for 14 nights went suddenly, utterly cold and dark. And somewhere in the frozen quiet, she heard, or felt, or dreamed she felt, the distant sound of a great wolf beginning, at long last, to howl. The sickness took Elira the way. Frost takes a window, slow, then all at once. The first day she told herself it was only grief. The second, only exhaustion. By the fourth day she could not keep food down, could not sleep for more than a few broken minutes, and the newly woken thing inside her, her wolf, awake barely a fortnight and already half-mad, paced and howled behind her ribs without cease, straining north toward the Grey Keep, toward the cold dying heart it had chosen. Every hour they stayed apart, the bond pulled tighter and hurt worse, a wire drawn through the center of her, and light became a blade, and Elira took to lying in the dark of the lamp shop's back room, with her arm across her eyes, shaking. The cruelest part was the certainty that came with the pain, a bone-deep, unarguable knowledge that Caven was suffering the same, somewhere behind those cold northern walls, and that every night the distance between them dragged him a little further under. She could feel it through the torn bond, like a hand growing colder in hers. Some nights, she woke gasping from the phantom sensation of ice closing over her own face, and knew, without knowing how, that it was his face, that she was feeling the frozen hall reach up for him, and there was nothing she could do about it from a shuttered room across the city. "You're bond sick," Hessa said grimly. Spooning broth Elira couldn't swallow, a half-woken bond, torn instead of sealed. "It won't kill you today. But it will kill you." Her old hands were not quite steady, and word from the keep says His Majesty has taken to his chambers and hasn't risen in 3 days. So it seems you two mean to die of the same wound in 2 different rooms, each of you certain it's the noble thing. She set the bowl down hard. I have never in my life met 2 people so determined to be considerate to death. He sent me away, Alira whispered. It was the only argument she had left, and it was the oldest one she owned, worn smooth as a river stone from a lifetime of handling. He decided he didn't want me there. What am I supposed to do? Force myself on a man who ordered me gone. I know when I'm not wanted. Hessa, I've always known. I learned it on a doorstep before I could talk, and Hessa, who had never in 13 years said a soft word where a sharp one would do, set down the broth and took Alira's fevered face in both her gnarled hands and made the girl look at her. Now you listen to me, child, because I'll only say it the once. You have spent your whole life making yourself smaller than the space you were given. Quieter, cheaper, easier to overlook, easier to leave, so that the next time somebody walked away, it wouldn't be able to hurt you, because you'd already agreed with them that you weren't worth staying for. Her thumbs brushed the tears off Alira's cheeks. But you were never the thing that was too small to keep, Alira. You were a wolf sleeping in a body everyone mistook for a mouse. And that man up in his cold tower didn't send you away because he doesn't want you. He sent you away because you are the one thing in his whole ruined life he wants too much to risk. Those are not the same, and if you cannot tell the difference between them, then that doorstep is still doing your thinking for you. Alira wept then, really wept, for the first time since the gate, and it felt like ice breaking somewhere deep. It was Doran who ended it. He came at dusk on the 5th day, no longer the composed Beta, but a man half wild with dread, and he did not knock so much as fall through the door. It's tonight, he said. The silvers reached his heart. He's cold all the way through. The healers can't find a pulse, but the once every long while, and he won't wake, and he won't. His voice broke. This Iron Man, clean in half. He's not fighting it, Alira, that's the worst of it. He's just letting it close over him like a man lying down in snow. I've begged, I've shouted. He can't hear me. He's already halfway into that cursed frozen hall and he's glad to be going. He seized her hands. You slip into that place. I've seen you do it. If there's any chance at all, take me to him, Alira said and stood. And her wolf stood with her, and for the first time in her whole small, invisible life, she did not make herself smaller. She let herself be exactly as large as she was. They rode through the frozen dark, and on the way, in a low, broken voice, Doran finally told her the thing his king had never been able to say, the whole shape of the wound the curse had been feeding on for a year. He had a sister, Doran said, watching the black city slide past, Myril. 10 years younger, and the only soft thing left in his family after the old king died. Where Kyavan was iron, she was light. She believed the war could be ended with words. She used to sit in on the councils and argue for mercy while the generals rolled their eyes. His mouth twisted. When the enemy finally offered a parley, she begged to come, to stand under the truce banner as proof of good faith. Kyavan didn't want to allow it, but the man he sent to guard her, the man who swore on his life she'd be safe, was Soren. He said the name like a curse of his own. Soren. His shield since they were boys. Closer than I ever was. Kyavan trusted him the way you trust your own hand. He betrayed them, Alira whispered. She already knew. She'd felt the shape of it through the bond for weeks. The enemy bought him. We never learned with what. Doran's hands had closed into fists. He led them out onto the snow under the white banner, and he stepped aside, and the ambush came, and by the time Kyavan fought his way to her, it was already too late. He stopped. Swallowed. She was gone before he could reach her, still not believing Soren had done it. And the enemy Alpha's mother, a bone witch called Vaska, who had watched Kyavan strike down her son, and with the last breath in her body she cursed him, that he'd be as cold as he'd made her, that the dead he failed would sit with him every night, until his heart froze solid, his voice dropped. He won the war that day. He's never once called it winning. He came home gray, and a month later he stopped sleeping. And then the cold started. And here we are. He turned to her eyes, wet. You understand now what he thinks he deserves, and why no healer could touch it. You can't cure a man who's decided the illness is his sentence. Elira understood. She understood it in her bones, because she had been serving her own quiet sentence for 19 years. Doran's servant's gate key turned in the sticking lock, and they went up through the silent keep to the king's chambers, where the cold was so total that frost furred every surface, and the healers stood back against the walls with nothing left to do. And there on the great bed lay Kaivan Vasail, gray as carved stone, his lips gone faintly silver, so cold and so still, that if not for the once-a-minute shudder of his chest, she'd have thought him already dead. Elira climbed onto the bed and gathered his terrible cold weight against her and pressed her warm face to his frozen one, and the bond screamed through her, and she understood with total clarity what Hessa and the old lore had never quite dared to say plainly, that the curse had never truly been strong enough to kill him. That a bonded mate should have snapped it like a thread. That the only reason the silvering had reached his heart at all was that some deep-buried part of the king had spent a year holding the door open for it, welcoming the cold, agreeing with the frozen dead that he deserved every inch they took, and no warmth on earth could save a man who had decided in his bones that he ought to freeze. She could not warm him from out here. She'd tried for 14 nights. The cold was not in his skin anymore. It was in the frozen hall, at the center of him, on the steps of that throne, and there was only one way left to reach it. All right, Elira breathed against his silver lips. You stubborn, self-hating, magnificent fool. If you won't come up, then I'm coming down. She took his cold face in both hands. She closed her eyes, and she let the frozen hall take her too. The cold hit her like the floor of a winter lake, but this time she did not fight the current dragging her down. This time she went with it, down and down, through the white, until her bare feet touched the frozen dais of the great hall, and the terrible silence closed over her head. The dead were all turned toward the throne, and on the steps knelt Kavin, and this time he was not merely kneeling, he was sinking, the ice climbing his arms, his shoulders, welcoming him, and he was letting it, his frost-pale eyes fixed and empty, and almost at peace, and at the center of it all sat the young woman with the wound that did not bleed. You came back, said the ghost of Myrel. Soft and sorrowful and kind. You shouldn't have. There's nothing here for you but cold. She tilted her head. He knows that. He's stopped pretending otherwise. Haven't you, brother? Myrel, Kavin breathed. And the name was a wound. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have seen him. And through the bond, all at once. Elira didn't just remember the story Doran had told her on the ride. She lived it, poured into her in a single freezing flood, from the inside through Kavin's own eyes. The white parley field, Myrel's mittened hand in his, before she pulled away to walk out under the truce banner, laughing, certain. Soren's face as he led them out, and the exact half-second it went wrong. The flicker of something Kavin had trusted for 30 years curdling into something else, the banner falling, the snow erupting into chaos and shouting. And Myrel, small and unarmed and calling her brother's name, still certain to her last breath that Soren would protect her, while Kavin fought toward her through the panicking crowd and could not reach her in time. She felt the weight of his sister going still in his arms. She felt the animal grief that had driven him to strike down the enemy Alpha who had ordered it. She felt Vaska's dying words land like frost on an open wound. And she understood the true cruelty of the curse. It had not invented a single one of these ghosts. It had only taken the king's own guilt, his iron certainty that if he'd been sharper, harder, less trusting, less loving, his sister would still be alive, and given it 1,000 frozen faces, and Myrel's gentle voice, and whispered to him every single night the one thing he already believed, the deepest part of himself. And the cold is only what you're owed. You could have saved me, Ghost Myrel murmured, exactly as he believed she must. A better brother would have. A better king. Their deaths are on your hands. All of them, and mine most of all. You know it's true. Lie down. Let it be over. Let it be paid. No? Elira's voice rang out across the frozen hall, and the dead flinched. She dropped to her knees in front of Caven, seizing his frost-white face, forcing his empty eyes to hers. Caven Vale, you look at me. That is not your sister. Your sister is dead, and the dead don't spend their peace accusing the people who loved them. That's not Myrel talking. That's the cruelest thing you believe about yourself wearing her face. She was crying, the tears turning to frost on her cheeks. You loved her. Loving people isn't the wound that killed her. Soren's betrayal killed her. A war killed her. And you have spent a whole year freezing yourself to death to pay a debt that was never, ever yours. I should have seen it coming, he whispered. So should everyone. No one did. That's what betrayal is. She pressed her forehead to his. Listen to me, because I know exactly the lie you're dying of. It's the same one I've been dying of my whole life. When someone we love is torn away from us, we decide it must be because we weren't enough. Because if it was our fault, then at least the world makes sense. At least we had some power over it. I decided my mother left me on a step because I wasn't worth keeping. You decided your sister died because you weren't good enough to save her, and we were both wrong. Caven, being left is not proof you deserved it. Being unable to stop a terrible thing is not the same as causing it. Her voice broke wide open. You are allowed to have loved her and lost her, and not be guilty of her death. You are allowed to set this down. You are allowed to live. If I set it down, he said, and his voice shook, then I have to live in a world where I let her go, where I stop paying. It feels like killing her twice. No. Alira took his frozen hands in both of hers the way she had on 14 warmer nights. Setting it down isn't forgetting her, it's the opposite. Right now you don't even have her. You have this thing wearing her face, throwing her death at you in the dark. If you let the guilt go, you get to keep the real Myrel, the one who laughed, the one who argued for mercy, the one who'd be heartbroken to see what her big brother's done to himself in her name. She pressed his hand to her chest, over her hammering heart. She doesn't want to be your punishment, Caven. Let her be your sister again. For a long, frozen moment, nothing moved. Then Caven turned from the ghost and looked at his sister's face one last time, and said, in a voice stripped of everything but grief and love, I would have died in your place, Myrel, 100 times. But I couldn't, and I'm sorry, and I have to stop dying in it now. He closed his eyes. Goodbye, I loved you. I let you go. And the ghost of Myrel smiled, not the terrible patient smile of the curse, but something young and real and free. And she said, in a voice that was finally, truly her own, then be warm, brother. And she closed her eyes, and she was gone. The frozen dead began to thaw, one by one. All across the vast hall, the ice sloughed from their shoulders, and they turned away from the throne and dissolved into the white-like breath. Their long accusation ended. The frost-blind windows cracked. Warmth, real warmth. The first in that place since the world began, came rolling in like a tide. And the great, frozen hall of the king's guilt began, at last, to break apart. But the cold, denied its throne, did not simply die, it turned. Alira felt it whip toward her, toward the new, warm, bonded thing that had unlocked its cage. And in an instant the killing frost that had spent a year eating the king poured itself into her instead. She gasped, as ice closed around her own heart. as her newborn wolf shrieked and thrashed, as the melting throne behind her groaned and began to refreeze around her ankles, dragging her down into it in his place. So this was the curse's last cruelty, she thought dimly as the cold reached her lungs. It would take her instead, and he would wake warm and whole beside her frozen body, and carry that grief forever, one more soul he'd failed to save. The frozen hall had simply chosen a new tenant for its throne, Elira, and Kayvon, warm now, alive now, his heart beating for the first time in a year, did the thing he had never once done in that hall in all the nights it had held him. He thought. He surged up off the melting dais and caught her as the ice took her, and he poured every scrap of his returning warmth back into her, exactly the way she'd poured hers into him for 14 patient nights, and he roared into the collapsing white, in the full voice of an alpha who has finally found something worth refusing death for. No. You don't get this one. This one I choose, and this one I keep. He bit down the mating bite, instinctive and claiming and utterly without hesitation, at the join of her neck and shoulder. And the half-woken bond that had been torn and aching between them for a week, slammed shut, sealed, complete, blazing up gold and warm and unbreakable through them both. It was not one heart warming another across a gap anymore. It was one warmth in two chests, and the cold had nowhere left to stand. The frozen throne shattered. The last of the ice screamed and broke and melted into nothing, and the great hall of the king's guilt came apart around them like frost on a window pane meeting the morning sun. They woke tangled together on the great bed as the frost melted from the walls and ran down the windows like the first thaw of spring, both of them gasping, both of them warm, his heart hammering strong and living beneath her palm. For a moment, neither of them could speak. Elira pressed her hand flat over that impossible heartbeat and felt it again and again, warm and steady and real, and began, helplessly, to laugh. The giddy, cracked laughter of someone who had walked all the way into death and come back holding hands with it. The healers were staring, white-faced. Doran was gripping the doorframe with tears running openly down his scarred face, saying her name over and over like a man who couldn't believe the word was allowed to be happy. And Kaevin Vael, Alpha of Arith, warm, at last, warm, all the way through, pulled Elira against his chest and buried his face in her hair and shook. A year of frozen grief, finally breaking open and pouring out of him in great racking waves. And she held him through every one of them and whispered the only thing that mattered. She said, "You're here. Your heart's beating. I can feel it under my hand, and I'm not going anywhere. Not ever again, because somebody finally decided I was worth staying for. And this time," she whispered, "that somebody was me." The curse did not vanish all at once, because grief never does. Kayavan still woke some nights reaching for a sister who wasn't there, and on those nights Elira simply held on and let him remember her out loud, not as a wound anymore, but as a girl who'd loved peace and laughed easily and would have adored the impossible foundling her brother had chosen. Slowly, the good memories outnumbered the frozen ones. Slowly, he learned that he was allowed to be happy in a world she wasn't in. That Elira came to understand was the real breaking of the curse, and it took not a night, but a whole warm year. They were bonded before the court, at the next kindling ball. 1 year to the night, from the evening, a lampright's apprentice had called the most dangerous man alive, a wet dog, in a freezing gallery. The great hall of Corvith blazed with 1,000 flawless lights, every wick trimmed and true. And this time Elira did not watch the ball from behind the walls. This time, she stood at its warm and glittering heart, in a gown, the color of firelight, a foundling with no bloodline and no people, and the whole assembled might of Arairth bowed, not only to their king, but to her. The whispers followed her still. "A nobody," they said, from a doorstep. But Caven's hand was steady and warm around hers, and when he lit the first flame of winter, he lifted their joined hands to do it, so that all 400 of them would understand exactly whose warmth had brought their king back from the cold. "They'll never quite get used to me," Elira murmured to him later. "In the warm dark of chambers that no longer froze. Then they can take it up with their king," Kievan said, drawing her back against his chest, his heart beating strong and slow beneath her ear. "Who happens to be unreasonably, catastrophically fond of his mate?" He pressed a kiss to the mating mark at her shoulder. "The wet dog thanks you, by the way." He'd been very cold for a very long time. Elira laughed, and settled into the warmth of him, two wolves finally awake and finally home. And outside the window a soft snow fell on a kingdom that no longer had anything to fear from the cold.